At the age of 16, when I was scowled at by my 25-year-old uncle with disdain as he said, "I like you? Do you think I'm in Beast?" But on my 18th birthday, he cornered me on his desk, loosened his tie, leaned in to kiss me, and hoarsely whispered, "Call me Beast, and I'll accept it." Max stood outside the window, his gaze fixed heavily on the Latin dance instructor's hand resting on my waist. It was the final session of the Latin dance class, and I was the only student left out when the instructor suggested dancing the last dance with him. I recalled that he had never crossed any boundaries before, so I nodded in agreement that although Max was not my biological uncle, as my temporary guardian, he responsibly came to pick me up. Even after rejecting my confession 2 years earlier, I remember myself at that time, looking at Max with hopeful eyes, nervously asking him after confessing my feelings, "Do you like me?" He leaned casually against the desk, swaying a glass of vodka, the scent spreading across the room. He just lowered his eyes, a hint of a smile playing on his lips. "I like you? Do you think I'm in Beast?" From then on, I forced myself to let go of him and never brought it up again. Ignoring Max's expression outside the window, I continued to follow the instructor's steps. As we were about to finish the dance, the instructor's hand that was supposed to be on my waist suddenly slid up to my back. He quickly pressed me towards him, his face mere inches away, his eyes clouded, a smirk on his lips. "How about a closing gift for you from the instructor?" The hand behind me holding me was undeniable. He leaned in closer as I tried to desperately tilt my head back. Just as he was about to touch me, he was abruptly pulled away. Max grabbed the instructor by the collar with one hand and slammed him against the wall. "Tell me, what were you trying to do just now?" The instructor coughed heavily, unable to speak, shaking his head. Max then threw him to the ground. The instructor was slim and shorter than Max, so it didn't seem like Max exerted much effort. The instructor was already dizzy from the altercation, and fearing Max might get into legal trouble, I took a step forward. "Uncle," Max turned his head, his voice low. "Don't tell me you're going to plead for him now." The man's cold gaze made me stop in my tracks. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to do anything." Max casually stood with one foot on the male teacher's face, lighting a cigarette in a careless manner. He then squatted next to the male teacher, pressing the crimson cigarette against his lip. A sizzling sound of burning, accompanied by the male teacher's screams of pain echoing in the room. "Can't control your mouth, I'll help you with that." Max stood up, looking down at the person on the floor, and casually threw a stack of banknotes from his wallet onto him. Indifferently, he said, "Compensation." On the way back, Max drove in silence. I sat in the passenger seat, typing out the recent encounter to send to my best friend. Seeing my best friend ranting indignantly about the male teacher, I couldn't help but smile slightly. Max happened to notice this scene. With one hand on the steering wheel, he gazed ahead. "You can still manage to smile?" I quickly composed my expression and replied, "No, it's just that I received a message from a friend. Boys or girls?" The air fell silent for a moment, with only the sound of Max's fingertips tapping on the steering wheel. I turned to look at Max and said, "Uncle, thank you for today. But I believe I should have my own privacy." The man next to me let out a light chuckle and said nothing more. However, the car sped up again. I looked out the window, puzzled. "This isn't the way to my house, is it? Your parents had to urgently travel to New Zealand this afternoon, and before they left, they called me to have you stay at my place for a while." I pursed my lips and said, "It's all right, Uncle, I can live alone." Before I could finish speaking, the car abruptly came to a stop. I involuntarily leaned forward and then quickly leaned back. "Ella, don't argue with me." Max leaned over, grabbed my shoulder, and looked at me with a restrained yet intense gaze. "Either you walk in by yourself right now, or I carry you in." The emotions that had been building up all day finally found an outlet and exploded. Intentionally, I pushed his hand away like an act of defiance, feeling aggrieved. "I want to go back to my own home." "Let me go, Max, I hate you." Max paused for a moment, loosened his grip, and said, "Why are you crying?" I don't want to talk to him, so I sniffled while sitting in the seat. From the corner of my Max got out of the car, walked around to the passenger side, and opened the door. Without a word, he hoisted me up horizontally and then kicked the door shut. Tears still in my eyes, I looked up at him in a daze. Max pursed his lips and held my gaze. After a few seconds, he tightened his grip on my shoulder. The sound of a man conceding came through. "I'm sorry." On the way back, he told me that he was a bit shaken and angry today. If he hadn't arrived in time, the male teacher might have suffered more than just a few words. He couldn't control his temper for a moment. Max apologized to me again. Since the incident, I have never seen him apologize to anyone. He seems to really indulge me. While I was delighted, I couldn't help but feel sad. Max treats me so well, probably just as a niece. Thinking like this, I kept suppressing the emerging sparks. But Max's once again inappropriate behavior made me start to confront a problem. Max might, in some way, like me, maybe more than a little. My best friend, celebrating our graduation and my coming of age, took me to a bar. Although we were both 18 on our IDs, my actual birthday was still 2 months away. Driven by curiosity and a spirit of exploration, my best friend observed for a while, then left me at the table to venture into the dance floor. I only took a sip of the drink in front of me and pushed it aside, opting instead to eat from the fruit plate. As I scanned the room for my best friend, my sight was suddenly blocked. Miss, all by yourself? A cliched and oily pickup line. I smiled politely at him and didn't respond. Want to have a drink together? I'll treat you. He bit his lip and raised an eyebrow. Did he think he was handsome? Before I could say anything, a polite male voice intervened. Sir, you've had too much to drink. Let me have someone take you home. Hey! Without giving the oil boy a chance to speak again, he was escorted away by security. The server turned to face me. Your friend doesn't need to worry, we'll take care of him. Your boss is waiting for you at VIP room 1 upstairs. I followed another server upstairs. The decoration on the second floor looked much fancier than the first. I walked over to the VIP room. A few wealthy-looking men were playing dice. Max looked up at me, cigarette in his mouth. Come over. I sat next to him. Did you see me just now? He chuckled and didn't answer. Amidst the laughter and conversation, I learned that one of the rich young men was actually the owner of this bar. I watched them play several rounds without understanding the rules. All I knew was that Max never lost. Someone protested, is Max's dice cup rigged? Either that or he's cheating. Max lazily chuckled, can a waste like me even do that? Amidst the protests, Max suddenly looked at me. Did you understand just now? I blinked and shook my head. Then he handed the dice cup of the person next to him towards me. A person approached and held my hand against the dice cup. Before I could react, someone spoke. Hey! This is great! Let the girl shake, we trust her. I can't do it, I said, trying to withdraw my hand, but his grip was firm. You just have to shake it. Max's head was very close, and the slight smell of alcohol in his breath swirled between us as he spoke. I turned my head to look at him, meeting his dark eyes perfectly. An ambiguous atmosphere was building between us. Max, it's your turn. I quickly snapped back to reality and turned my head. Max held my hand and shook the dice cup, quickly stopping. He opened it and looked at the numbers inside, then smiled. What's wrong? I asked. Just as Max was about to call the count, he shifted his gaze back to me. 7 6s. The next person squinted his eyes. Open up. Max lost, and he laughed as he finished the drink in front of him. In the following rounds, Max's luck turned, and he kept losing. Perhaps out of a sense of guilt, thinking that Max was getting drunk because of me shaking the dice, I took the initiative to take him home. The designated driver parked the car in the parking lot and left. I helped Max up the stairs and into the house. The man, who had been drowsy all along, suddenly sat up as I wiped his face with a towel. As his face was very close to mine, Max's eyes were hazy from the alcohol. He put one hand on my shoulder and pinched my ear. Little girl, I responded softly. His hand that pinched my ear slid down to my chin, fingertips pressing against my lips, exerting pressure. Max's gaze gradually shifted downwards to my lips. His face drew closer. Just before contact, he leaned on my shoulder. With a hint of a chuckle, he said somewhat wistfully, "You have not reached 18 yet." At that time, I thought he was just drunkenly rambling. It wasn't until my 18th birthday that I saw another side of Max. On my 18th birthday, a classmate, Charlie, publicly confessed his feelings for me, and Max cut us. Charlie stood in front of me holding a bouquet of flowers and said, "Ella, I like you." "Do you like me?" Max happened to come down from upstairs and looked down on the scene. In that moment, I felt like I had gone back 2 years. I had asked Max the same question before. His rejection was firm. Max's ambiguous feelings, caused by his drunkenness, no longer counted in my mind. He didn't like me, it was just my own wishful thinking. Lost in my thoughts, Charlie mistook my distraction as an acknowledgement of his confession. He directly placed the flowers in my arms and attempted to hold my hand. Before our hands touched, Max had somehow appeared behind me, pulling my hand back. The bouquet of flowers fell to the ground, creating an awkward atmosphere. Ignoring the flowers completely, Max only smiled at Charlie. "Did she agree to be yours?" he asked, reaching for my hand. Charlie blushed with embarrassment. "I'm sorry," he muttered before turning to me. "Did you agree then?" Max's grip on my wrist tightened slowly. I bit my lip, hesitating. Charlie had always been genuinely kind to me, and I didn't want to humiliate him in front of so many people. She refuses," Max interjected abruptly. Despite his maintained smile, a hint of hostility crept into his eyes. Before anyone could react, he casually instructed his assistant, who had just rushed in to deliver files, to entertain the guests properly. Then, he dragged me back upstairs to his study. "What were you hesitating about earlier?" Max didn't turn on the light, leaving only the moonlight streaming in through the window. He was shrouded in darkness, his expression indiscernible. His smile held a chill. "Don't tell me you were actually considering agreeing to him?" I felt an inexplicable sense of unease, but I stood my ground. "Is that not allowed?" Max advanced towards me, gradually cornering me against the edge of the desk. With no retreat possible, I met his gaze head-on. The dark night was unrelenting, but the darkness in his eyes crept closer with every step. He stared at me unwaveringly, one hand suddenly looping behind my waist. Before I could react, he lifted me with one arm and placed me on the desk. "Don't you like me?" he asked in a calm tone, his gaze growing more intense. His hand at my waist remained, applying a gentle pressure. His casual disclosure of feelings he had kept hidden for years ignited a mix of embarrassment and anger that surged to the surface. For a few seconds, I glared at him, using all my strength to push him away. "I don't like you anymore. I stopped liking you a long time ago. Don't forget your own words. If you like me, you're an beast." Max effortlessly pinned down my legs and captured my wrists. He gritted his teeth, chuckling with a smirk in his eyes. He loosened his tie, and all the rationality in his eyes collapsed. When he called me a beast, I had to admit it. I froze for a moment, and Max was already leaning down. It was the kind of kiss adults shared. His fingertips pressed against my chin, forcing me to respond to his kiss. As Max kissed me passionately, he lifted my hand to rest on his neck. When I finally reacted and struggled, it was in vain. Max kept me subdued, not allowing me to move. I had no choice but to bite his lower lip. Max paused, opened his eyes to look at me. But his lips remained close, densely kissing the edge of my lips. What was going on? I turned my head away, trembling as I asked, "Uncle, what are you doing?" Max pinched my chin, forcing me to turn back, meeting his gaze. He was refuting with actions. I blinked. It took me a while to understand this. He was countering what I had just said about him not liking me. It was a cliché yet reasonable excuse. "I am too young," Max admitted frankly. When I was 16, he indeed still saw me as a child. All the emotional changes had happened silently. When Max leaned in to kiss me again, I quickly covered his mouth with my hand. Confused, Max raised an eyebrow. "I haven't agreed to be with you yet," I continued. "And how can I agree? I need to think about it," I said with restraint. I still remembered crying all night 2 years ago when Max rejected my confession, deciding to close off my heart to love. How could I agree to him so easily now? Except for moments of anger, Max always indulged me. This time was no exception. He chuckled, flicked my earlobe. "Deal." In the following days, Max did indeed pursue me seriously. For example, one day, he called and wanted to take me out for dinner. After giving it some thought, I declined. I had already made plans with someone else. Is it a guy or a girl? He always cared about this question. "It's a girl," I lied. In reality, I had made plans with Charlie. That day, Max had unceremoniously rejected Charlie on my behalf, and I felt somewhat guilty. I agreed to go out with Max today to apologize to him and give him a clear answer. Even though he treated me well, my heart remained drawn to someone else. I had kept it a secret to avoid complications. However, just as Charlie and I were leaving after dinner, we coincidentally bumped into Max coming in. I just knew things were about to escalate. In that moment, the regret of choosing a restaurant near home for convenience peaked. Completely forgetting that Max's company was also nearby. Max just looked at me silently for a while, then left with his business partner. Due to my parents being away on a business trip for half a year, I was still staying at Max's house. He didn't return until 11 o'clock at night. The anticipation in my heart, as the footsteps of the man outside gradually approached, grew louder. A muffled knock on the door sounded. I played dead and didn't move. I opened the door. Tonight there was no escaping it. I hesitated as I walked over to open the door. Uncle. The man in front of me reeked of alcohol, invading my breath. Even without looking up, I knew he was angry. How was dinner with your friends tonight? It was fine. My voice carried a lack of confidence. Max looked at me silently for a while, then smiled faintly and said, "You should go to bed early." I watched his retreating figure with a sense of loneliness and impulsively reached out to grab his sleeve. "Are you angry?" Max, with his back turned to me, said nothing and didn't move. I suddenly didn't want to make things difficult for him anymore. He hadn't done anything wrong. After all, 2 years ago, it was completely reasonable for him to reject me because he didn't like me. Both emotionally and morally. And then, he started to have feelings but had to suppress them. Waiting for me to grow up. What he casually concealed under his carefree attitude was endless suffering. I took a step forward, wrapping my arms around his waist from behind. "Why are you angry?" "I don't like him anyways." Max turned around, with traces of brokenness in his eyes. "Then who do you like?" I smiled and answered one word at a time. "It has always been you." Before the words had fully left my mouth, he pushed me into his bedroom and pressed me against the door. The kisses rained down. He was impatient, giving orders curtly. "Open." As soon as I opened my mouth, he devoured my breath. Max gripped my shoulders with a fierce strength, leaving no room for escape. Just as I was about to lack oxygen, he gradually released me. His large hand slid down from my shoulders to my waist. Max slowly stepped back. "So, what did you do with him today?" I breathed heavily, speaking hesitantly. "Officially, I rejected him. It's a, resolution." "Well done," Max said. While the atmosphere was hot and ambiguous, my phone rang at the most inappropriate time. I took it out to check. It was Charlie. Max took 2 steps back, leaning against the table behind him, smiling and nodding. "Answer it." I hesitated for a few seconds, upholding my clear and honest thoughts with Charlie as I answered the call on speakerphone. "Ella, I really like you. You might as well not answer." Charlie seemed a bit drunk, slurring his words. Max lit a cigarette, bit down on it, and upon hearing the words from the other side, he lowered his head and sneered. He took my phone, lit the cigarette, and took a drag. There was a mocking smile in his voice. "Friend, she really doesn't like you, why bother?" "What's the point?" Max said as he rubbed my slightly swollen lips that were kissed. He delighted in ridiculing the failures, showcasing his own success. There was silence on the other end of the phone, followed by the sound of a glass being smashed. Max smirked sarcastically, hung up the phone directly, and tossed the mobile phone back to me. I pondered whether Charlie was out drinking alone and if it was safe. I was torn about whether to ask him. "What's wrong?" Max spoke up. I told him what was on my mind. The man's eyes suddenly darkened. He tilted his head and crushed the cigarette, then pulled me towards him. With his hand gripping the back of my neck, the warning was clear. "Have I spoiled you, huh? Allowing you to so openly think about someone else in front of me?" My neck tingled. I sent a message to one of Charlie's friends asking him to have Charlie call back, then immediately turned off the phone. It wasn't just Charlie who had drunk too much. There was also the man in front of me, who was far more dangerous than Charlie. I was wronged. I looked at him intensely, hoping he could feel my sincerity. Apparently, Max successfully received the message and released the grip on the back of my neck. He then took my hand and placed it on his tie, helping me to loosen it. I swallowed hard, trying to ignore the burning gaze above my head to work on untying it. Things were progressing too quickly. Max smiled leisurely, not mentioning my embarrassment. He was wearing only a white shirt with the tie hanging loosely slanted, and the sleeves rolled up to the forearm. Despite the formal dressing, he exuded a touch of charm. My ears blushed again uncontrollably. As the tie was loosened, the man's lips approached once more. Unlike the previous outburst, this time it felt more like a romantic gesture between lovers. I thought Max would make a move, but in reality, his hands remained benignly placed on my waist, calming my bewildered heart. After the kiss, I instinctively raised my head to look at him. Max seemed to understand what I was thinking as he narrowed his eyes at me. "Do you want to do something else?" "Yes or no." "I don't want to do anything." I immediately shook my head. Later on, every time we met, it was just kissing. I knew he was just loosening his tie when I saw Max in his shirt, because he found the tie constricting him. During the time I spent with Max, the most extreme thing he did to me was kissing. I didn't feel anything wrong with this situation, and I even enjoyed the slow-burning feeling. But I overlooked one thing. Max is a man approaching 30. He is an adult man. Like most men, he wouldn't settle for just kissing his girlfriend. I didn't expect to hear an explanation from Charlie about this unexpected behavior of his. Max went on a business trip to Seattle and was so busy that he hardly had time to reply to my messages. However, on the second night, I saw him in the entertainment headlines. A popular female movie star kissing her boyfriend passionately in a car late at night, and the man turned out to be a tycoon in the financial world. The paparazzi seemed to be at a considerable distance, and the dim interior of the car made it difficult to see clearly the man's face. But I was very sure that the person in the car in that photo was Max. He had taken me to Seattle before, and that was the car he drove. However, I couldn't be absolutely certain that the man in the picture was Max. This news broke out. Charlie also saw it and called me after a long time. He was not surprised by me being with Max because I rarely called Max uncle in front of outsiders. Everyone thought of him as my non-blood-related older brother. "It should be your boyfriend in the picture, what do you think, Ella?" I am not used to discussing my relationship with my boyfriend with others, especially not with Charlie. As I was about to brush it off, he spoke again. "Aren't you suspicious at all?" His suggestive words made me frown. "This is my own business." Charlie's tone softened a bit. "Ella, I don't have a bias against him. I'm just thinking from a normal man's perspective." He paused and asked firmly, "You've been together for so long, and nothing has happened between you two, right?" I was shocked at how he guessed that. But I was even more repulsed by the idea of irrelevant people bringing up such matters. Charlie didn't give me a chance to argue further. He concluded my silence. "You know why?" he sneered. "Because he thinks you're too young, he's afraid of feeling guilty. But he also can't ignore his personal issues. And now, this female celebrity has offered herself to him on a silver platter. How could he not take the opportunity?" It sounded logical. However, I've known Max for over a decade, and I know what kind of person he is better than you. I calmly rebutted him. "The people in the car were not clearly photographed, and yet you assert it's Max. What if it's not him? Have you considered the consequences you'll have to face?" I turned on the call recording function. "Max's legal team could sue you based on what you just said. Are you ready to bear that responsibility?" Charlie was speechless. Rumors cost nothing, yet some people fail to think before speaking and subjectively define others. "Charlie, stop calling me. As my boyfriend said, do you have the guts?" I could hear the frustration in his voice even through the static on the phone. "Ella, you really have no sense." With a click, the call was ended. Feeling angry, I tried calling Max back. His phone was off. I tossed my phone in frustration, curled up on the couch. The air felt heavy and stiflingly silent. I blinked back tears. It wasn't that I doubted Max's involvement with that celebrity. I simply felt indignant on his behalf. He must have been getting bashed by the actor's fans. For the first time, I noticed the emptiness of the house. Or perhaps it was just that I missed Max. Sometimes, the object of longing appears just when you need them, a stroke of luck. This time, I was favored by Lady Luck. The front door creaked open. I stared in disbelief. Max walked in, his suit jacket slung over his arm, shirt collar unbuttoned. He looked a bit disheveled. After changing his shoes, he sat next to me. He naturally lifted me up and set me on his lap. Crying? He reached up to wipe my tears. I buried my face in his neck, letting out a muffled yes. "Because of that rumor?" he asked casually, as if unfazed. I shook my head as I held onto him. "I just missed you. I know the rumor is false." I admired Max in part for his character. His charm was only skin deep, and he never strayed. A short chuckle escaped him. He raised an eyebrow teasingly. So, was it unnecessary for me to hurry back? I looked up. There was a touch of weariness in his face. It was then that I realized the rumor surfaced just after completing a project. Worried I might misunderstand, he immediately handled the situation, then rushed back to see me without taking a break. He hadn't even rested. His phone was off earlier because he was on a plane. He had borrowed a friend's car that night, and the paparazzi, unable to get a clear shot of his face, linked the car's license plate to me and jumped to conclusions. When I leaned over and kissed his slightly blue eyes, I asked softly, "Are you tired?" Max, his hand resting on my waist, let out a grunt. "Then you should go and rest for a while," I urged him. Just as I was about to get up from his lap, he held me down. "Come here, give me a kiss first," he spoke so bluntly, suppressing the heat rising in my face. I leaned over and kissed him. He looked at me indifferently, unmoved. I quickly blinked, reached for his face, and imitated the way he had once kissed me. Slowly prying open his lips until it deepened, my awkward movements made Max furrow his brows. He pressed me against his chest. In that moment, he quickly took the lead in the kiss. With a scorching breath rising, gradually eroding rationality. Max lifted me up with this action, kissing me while walking towards the bedroom. And when my back was already against the door, Max reached for the doorknob, but he suddenly stopped. Then he stepped back a bit. "What's wrong?" I asked subconsciously, lost in the kiss. With a storm brewing in his eyes, Max remained silent and kissed me again. This time, it was intense, pressing me against the door to kiss. The force seemed as if he wanted to crush me. But that was it. Max gently bit my lip before pulling away. Before I could react, he put me down. Without even looking at me, Max went straight into the bedroom and shut the door, even locking it. Standing frozen in place, I heard Charlie's words echoing in my mind. But his personal issues had to be dealt with. He believed that Max would find someone else. But in reality, Max dealt with problems in his own way. An hour later, Max emerged in pajamas, smelling of shower gel. His expression was calm as if nothing had happened. I pretended not to know, didn't bring it up. The scandal seemed serious to outsiders, but I found it trivial. The real trouble was Uncle. I had gotten used to calling him that, and I sometimes forgot to switch back. Max paused briefly before responding, "My parents are coming back." He looked up at me. "I haven't told my parents about us yet," I whispered. Max's face showed no sign of worry. "Then I'll tell them." "No, you can't." If Max's tendency to be blunt in his speech surfaced in this matter, my parents might actually kill him. "I'll do it. At least I can be more subtle about it. Maybe they'll take it better that way." After my parents returned, I moved back in with them. Every night, I had to hide under the blankets and secretly talk to Max over voice messages. A week later, as I was leaving him a voice message, Max seemed to be getting impatient. "When are you planning to tell them?" I heard the sound of a lighter igniting and imagined him frustratedly smoking. Pretending not to understand, I asked, "What's the rush?" "It's been a week since we saw each other," he stated coldly. "So?" Max chuckled, his voice slightly slurred, probably due to the cigarette in his mouth, giving his tone a lazy, rebellious vibe. "Ella, I'll give you 3 days. If you don't speak up by then, I'll come over." I let out an uncomfortable noise and angrily hung up the phone. I must admit, Max's threat was effective on me. Afraid that he might show up unannounced and kiss me in front of my parents without any warning, I decided to subtly bring it up the next day. "Mom, Dad, I have something to announce tonight. Let's invite Uncle Xiao for dinner." I had been preparing my parents for this moment for a week, subtly asking them if they minded me dating someone 9 years older. Luckily, my parents were quite open-minded. As long as the person had a good character and treated me well, they didn't have many other requirements. My mom thought for a moment and smiled. "All right. Let's call your Uncle Xiao. He must come tonight." I didn't understand my mom's sudden enthusiasm until later in the evening, shortly after Max arrived, when the doorbell rang again. Max and I were sitting in the living room while my mom was cooking. "He's here. He's here," my mom exclaimed as she hurried from the kitchen to answer the door. Walking in behind her was Luna, a woman who appeared to be in her mid to late 20s, gentle and intellectual. A bad feeling slowly began to form in my mind. My mother sat Luna down next to Max. "You two chat first. The food is almost ready," she said before busying herself in the kitchen. "Luna just returned from Luxembourg. Max, didn't you also spend some time in Luxembourg before?" "Talk more with her," she said, dropping a bombshell and then hastily retreating to the kitchen. Luna smiled at Max. "Max Walton, it's a pleasure to meet you." Max politely smiled back but remained silent, clearly showing his reluctance to engage. However, Luna seemed to have a fondness for him and continued to chatter away, unaffected by his coldness, constantly finding new topics to discuss. Despite trying to be polite, Max kept his responses short. But Luna wouldn't stop talking. Sitting by the side, I couldn't focus on my phone anymore. I turned my head and smiled brightly at Luna. "Sister, you are so beautiful." Luna blushed and replied, "Thank you." "You two chat, I'm heading back to my room," I announced before getting up and leaving without even looking at Max. A few minutes later, there was a knock on my bedroom door. I opened it with an indifferent expression, knowing it would be Max. As he came in, he locked the door and had a faint smile on his lips. "Why are you giving me the cold shoulder when I brought her here?" I instantly plastered a smile on my face. "You're right. I should encourage my younger uncle in his dating endeavors. Now go outside and don't keep Luna waiting, also don't disappoint my mother's good intentions." Max glanced at me, walked over, and grabbed the back of my neck. "Feeling rebellious?" A female voice outside the door interjected, "Max," followed by more knocking. As I raised my hand to push Max away, he pressed me against the door. Max responded to Luna but lightly kissed the corner of my lips. "I see dinner is almost ready. I'll come to get you for dinner." Max's kiss had now traveled to my ear. I nervously held my breath, afraid of making any noise. Fortunately, the footsteps outside gradually faded away. Max held me restrained, kissed my earlobe lightly, and said, "What are you afraid of? She can't hear us." I grabbed the hem of his shirt, asking softly, "Do you like that type of girl? Gentle and graceful." The boys in class once discussed that no guy would dislike a gentle girl. When I heard that, I just smirked and quoted a famous saying, "I don't care what he likes." But now, I suddenly felt a bit awkward about Max. He was too dazzling, and a sense of unease crept into my mind uncontrollably. Max didn't say anything, he just lowered his head and kissed me, using a skilled and teasing kissing technique to elicit a response from me. After a while, Max stopped and rested his forehead against mine. His pitch-black and bright eyes gazed at me. "I like you. There are no types to like, only people to like." He took my hand and placed it on his chest. Unlike his usual carefree self, his tone was full of seriousness. "Ella, with me, you never need to doubt yourself. It has always been me who is more insecure than you." In my mind, Max would never have self-doubt. I looked at him in astonishment, expressing disbelief, wanting him to elaborate. Max chuckled self-deprecatingly and openly shared his thoughts with me. At first, when they were just starting out, he actually cared a lot about the nearly 10-year age difference. He was afraid that I was only fixated on him because of his 16-year-old self. Afraid that the generation gap would be too large, that one day I would lose interest in him and find him boring. He even worried that as he entered middle age, I would still be in my prime. Loving someone can indeed make one cautious. I threw myself into his arms, wrapping my arms around his waist. "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have pressured you to talk about it." Max smiled and hugged me back. "I think he likes me far more than I imagined." The atmosphere at the dinner that day wasn't good when Miss Yu left. This was because Max casually mentioned that he already had a girlfriend at the dinner table. My mother apologized to Miss Yu and then tried to reassure Max. "I didn't consider everything properly this time. I made a decision without consulting you first." Initially looking ashamed, my mother's expression instantly changed when she heard Max's words. "It's okay. Fortunately, my girlfriend witnessed the whole process, or you might have misunderstood me." What? My mother stuttered. Max lazily smiled and casually lifted my chin as I sat stiffly on the couch. "Here, my girlfriend." My mother mechanically turned her head and looked at me as if she was looking at a dead person. I exploded. With a loud table slap from my father, the two of them started a back-and-forth verbal attack. It went from morality to personality and eventually returned to the topic of age. Max lowered his eyes, silently enduring their accusations. But he hadn't done anything wrong. I suddenly spoke softly, looking at my parents. Why can you accept me dating a stranger who is 9 years older than me, but you can't accept it when that person is Max? I couldn't help choking up. Mom, Dad. I know it's hard for you to accept right now. I'll give you time to adjust, and I will explain everything to you. But, please stop blaming Max. My parents fell silent for a moment. In this slightly suffocating atmosphere, I took Max's hand and walked towards the door. You should go back first, I will explain things to them properly. Keeping Max here would only worsen the tension and make my parents angrier the more they saw him. He didn't say anything, just patted my head and left. I explained things to my parents for a long time, trying to reason with them. Because we both acted with good intentions, the outcome shouldn't be too bad in the end. Max's mother is my mother's godmother. Initially, my mother had planned for me to call Max brother. Then she worried about mixing up the generations and settled on calling him uncle. Even though my mom reluctantly accepted me and Max being together, she still had to let out her anger. For example, she childishly went to Max's parents to complain. Then Max was severely reprimanded by his family. And the severity was doubled. But in the end, Max and I could be together openly. My mom's only requirement was that certain premarital behaviors had to wait until I was 20 before getting engaged. When I mentioned it to Max, he agreed readily. Before the engagement, my hands trembled from exhaustion. I finally understood why Max could agree to my mom's request without hesitation. When we got engaged, I was just starting my junior year of college. On the day of the month-long break, Max was waiting for me early at the school gate, planning to take me to try on wedding dresses. I stopped in my tracks and stood nearby watching him. He wore a silver-gray suit and a black overcoat. Leaning back against the car, he lit a cigarette nonchalantly. Behind him were maple trees, uncertain if their leaves would fall. At 30 years old, he still managed to look irresistibly handsome. Max, I called out to him. He looked up, still wearing that careless expression. I felt a hint of warmth even in the brisk breeze that just passed by. Giving me the illusion that summer hadn't completely vanished, I started jogging towards him and threw myself into his arms. Diving into this autumn, into the warmth that is endless and unique.